Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's so nice to be here together with my co-facilitator and with our panelists today. Welcome everybody to Equity in Action, Learning from Black Leaders Detroit and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation on partnering to close the racial wealth gap. And I wanted to first introduce our co-facilitators today on this webinar, who are myself, Kat Athanasiadis. I'm a senior associate at the Center for Evaluation Innovation. My pronouns are she, her, and my colleague, Kayla Christopherson, who's an associate with CEI, and she'll be supporting the webinar today and monitoring the chat and Q&A, so you will see her there. And for those of you who are less familiar with CEI, we're a nonprofit that partners with philanthropy to provide change makers the space and resources needed to advance racial justice and create an equitable future. So the Kellogg Foundation is also supporting this series, so we wanted to thank them for their support. So today is May Day. It is International Workers' Day. It's an important day. These days, May Day and International Workers' Day had separate origins, but they became tied together historically in literal battles over labor rights in Chicago in 1886. And now, almost 140 years later, we're still struggling with many of the same dysfunctions of that older economic system, which include forms of xenophobia and racism that are deployed to divide people and workers against each other. So this is an important day, and we're really pleased that today we get to be in conversation together with Dwan Dandridge from Black Leaders Detroit, Kumar Raj from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and Huilan Kren, also from the Kellogg Foundation. And I will give a little bit more of an introduction and bios in just a moment. So this webinar series, this is the first of a set of webinars that CEI is producing, and it's a product of conversations with a set of funders about ways that philanthropy can and does work towards closing the widening racial wealth gap in the US. And so the question that we're asking is, how can foundation program, learning, and evaluation functions be best positioned as partners to close the widening racial wealth gap in the US? So in this series, we're focusing on this one approach that some foundations use, which is equitably deploying capital to Black, Indigenous, Latine, and other entrepreneurs of color. And we're starting with the work. What is the work? And asking questions about what the work is here. How do on-the-ground organizations and foundations partner to do this work? And where does learning and evaluation add value? So our objectives for today are to offer some concrete examples of what it looks like to equitably move capital to entrepreneurs of color who are firmly rooted in place, and also to offer examples about how a foundation's learning and evaluation function can support this work. So we're so happy to be bringing this to you. We'll have our panelists speak for about 35 minutes. That'll leave about 15 minutes for Q&A. And just as some guidance for you as you're listening, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom webinar window. And we'll be monitoring those and then sharing some of them during the Q&A. So moving along, I'm so happy to introduce our panelists. Again, Dwan Dandridge, Kumar Raj, and Huilan Kren. And I'll just share a little bit about each of their bios. So Dwan is the co-founder and CEO of Black Leaders Detroit. He was born and raised in Detroit, and his leadership journey is shaped by grassroots activism, successful entrepreneurship, and a significant tenure as a UAW union rep. Dwan is passionate about creating pathways to shared power, and he values unconventional skills. And he approaches access to capital disparities from various angles, dedicated to forging equitable solutions. And as I just learned, is an avid cyclist. So thank you, Dwan, for being here with us today. Kumar Raj is a program officer for the Kellogg Foundation based in Detroit, focused on economic equity. And before joining Kellogg, Kumar served as a senior program officer at the Skillman Foundation, where he led the foundation's economic well-being portfolio that was designed to increase the number of young people who meaningfully graduate from high school to be better prepared for their next step. And before that, he was a program director at Ashoka's Youth Venture, helping young people launch social ventures, stateside and abroad. And so thank you, Kumar, for being with us today. And Huilan Kren is the Director of Learning and Impact at Kellogg, and she supports foundation efforts to promote thriving children, working families, and equitable communities. And Huilan is responsible for leading and managing the evaluation system building and activities in support of all of the Kellogg programming areas. So she works closely with Kellogg program leadership in measuring and understanding the outcomes and impact of programming strategies and investments, and also partners with foundation program staff, grantees, external evaluators, data partners, and other evaluation stakeholders to deliver high quality, evidence-based monitoring, evaluation, and capturing of lessons learned around Kellogg's programmatic work. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Huilan, for being with us today. And thank you all for joining us for this webinar, the kickoff in our series. So as I shared earlier, we want to lead with what is the work? So we wanted to start with you, Dwan, and ask what was the need that you saw in Detroit that compelled you to start Black Leaders Detroit?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think that for us, it was obvious, right, that Black entrepreneurs just still aren't seeing the same level of access to capital. Oftentimes, when you are living the experience, you have to wait on someone else to go and spend a lot of money to go and do a study, right, and come back and do research to report and validate what you're living. So for us, the power dynamics were just out of place. The thing that sparked me or pushed me to form a team to start the organization was my own experience where I was actually going after funding for a development project that I needed to raise $1 million for. And I ended up finding one group that was willing to loan me some money. It was social impact investors, and very nice people, and loved the idea, loved the vision, and kind of believed in me enough to get behind me. And what I realized was it was really hard to find them, for one, but two, it was a development project happening in Detroit. I'm a Detroiter. They were not Detroiters. They also are white people. And just the power dynamics and them having the ability to say, yes, Dewan, who's born and raised in Detroit, could or could not do this project in the city of Detroit were unsettling. And I realized at that moment we had to have a pot of money that was for Black Detroiters, that was led and run by Black Detroiters, just because we understand each other at a much higher level.
Yeah, thanks, Dwan. And Kumar, why was it important for you and for Kellogg that Kellogg supported the work that Dwan was leading and is leading?
Thanks, Kat. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for having me. So the through line of the Foundation's economic equity portfolio in Detroit is around wealth building, right? And really helping more Detroiters access the middle class. We know that entrepreneurship plays a critical role in wealth creation and the development of local economies. And one of the most significant barriers to Black entrepreneurship stems from the long-held kind of belief by banks and other lending sources, right, that these entrepreneurs are higher risk candidates, right, for loans. And for many Black entrepreneurs, they consider kind of these institutionalized practices and don't even bother applying for a loan because they believe they'll be denied, right? And so I guess the question, like, why was it important for the Foundation to support Black Leaders Detroit? I'd say there's a number of factors, right? One, they're visible, they're accessible, and they're trusted messengers within the community, right? They have deep networks because they're part of the community they want to serve and partner with, right? In Detroit, right? You heard Dwan was born and raised in the city, right? They're fantastic storytellers. And I think the last point is really, Dwan is exactly who he says he is, right? And he's been that way. And I think, for me, I respect that a ton, and I think a lot of other people do as well.
Great. Dawn, can you remind us, I don't know if you just shared it, but when you started Black Leaders Detroit?
Yeah. First, thanks, Kumar. Appreciate that. We started Black Leaders Detroit in 2019. We started meeting to describe and figure out and establish the organization. and we launched October 26, 2019, right before like all the craziness that 2020 brought. We like to say that we knew that the need was there before things shut down and came to a halt for the entrepreneurs. And we saw that and all the studies are saying that Black entrepreneurs were impacted even at a greater deal once the shutdowns happened due to COVID. So we launched, I guess, at a really pivotal time where the spotlight was shined on small business, and that kind of helped us in some ways while the businesses were suffering even more.
Kat, may I ask a follow-up question to Dawn?
Absolutely.
Cool. Dawn, can you just speak a little bit about what Black Leaders Detroit is? Like,
yeah,
what are
definitely.
like main bodies of work? Like, what are you all doing over there, right?
So the way I typically describe us is we are a funding vehicle for Black entrepreneurs that operate in the city of Detroit, right? We service the nonprofit and for-profit sector, and we do that primarily with grants and a no-interest loan. And I didn't say low interest, a no interest loan. And we have been able to deploy over $2.8 million to Black entrepreneurs since we started. We started off doing $500 emergency grants in response to COVID. We weren't scheduled to dole out any funding until October of 2020, but we saw the devastation that the pandemic was causing. We started to deploy capital in April. And you'd be surprised at how happy some of the small businesses were just to receive a $500 grant. But even the businesses that applied and didn't receive funding from us were like really happy to know that somebody had set something up with them in mind in particular. And you touched on it earlier, Kumar, when you said that, there are many businesses that have applied for a no interest loan from us that haven't and would not apply other places just because we often walk away wondering if we got denied because we were not qualified, or is this pot of money set up for everybody but Black people? You know what I mean? So we still have, those concerns, but that's who we are at Black Leaders Detroit and what we do.
Okay, thanks, Dawn. And thanks, Kumar, for asking that question. It does definitely help to hear more about what exactly it is, and also to know that I know this is something we talked about before. This is really hard work, and Dawn, I know you've shared about how hard it is to do the work. Can you share a little bit about like what are some of the things that you've come through in order to do this work, and like what it is that makes it really hard?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we experienced early on, even in trying to raise money for the organization, was that in 2019, I was asking some corporations, a couple come to mind in particular, and I won't name them, but would they be willing to, grant and fund some of the work that we were doing? And they said that we were not inclusive enough. And so they wouldn't be ready to. They circled back to us in 2020, asking if, we would be willing to make an ask from them because they wanted to fund us. So like we had to experience the brutal death of George Floyd and all of the young, brave people out there protesting in the middle of a life-threatening pandemic in order to bring some people to the table, right? To take us seriously as an organization. So that's, if you want to talk about like the struggle, like that's one of the things that come to mind. But I'm also raising money now for a very specific product. It's going to be a no interest loan for Black entrepreneurs that are real estate developers. And I have a construction background myself. And right now we've made loans to 115 different businesses, and they are in every industry imaginable. But many of them are in the small storefront, mom and pop shop space, and they are doing a great job of providing an income for the owner and a couple jobs, right? There are a few businesses that we've funded that have great growth potential, but in my experience, the real opportunity for wealth accumulation is in real estate as well as tech right now. And we have, in Detroit, we have a lot of investors from outside of Detroit coming and buying property, and the Detroiters, specifically the Black Detroiters, don't necessarily have a pot of money that they can tap into so that they can participate in what's happening in Detroit right now. So that's what I'm working on. And my frustration is I've been trying to raise $5 million and I'm getting, verbal commitments. And, the way philanthropy works sometimes is we want to see somebody else in first before we make the commitment. And I would say that at the same time, I'm watching my white colleagues do capital campaigns of $30 million. And for a much shorter amount of time, they've raised the 5 million I'm trying to raise plus some, right? So I would say that still figuring out what's the difference in this space, because before doing this work, I would have put everything in the same box, and that would have been racism, right? But I've come to learn that while that box is still there, right, it's also relationship building. So, connecting with friends and colleagues Kumar at the Kellogg Foundation, you're able to get on platforms like this, share your message, and hopefully, do the work to establish new relationships that can help us get to that point, right? We are not going to try to fix the racism problem. We'll let people that don't want to fund Black Leaders Detroit, not fund us. We're okay with that, but we do want to build those relationships and those connections with people that believe in the work that we do and see the value in it.
Right. Thanks, Dwan. And I think that's a nice segue into talking about the partnership between Black Leaders Detroit and the Kellogg Foundation. So I am hoping that we can hear more about how Black Leaders Detroit and Kellogg partner to move capital more equitably. What does that partnership look like? What does it enable?
Sure, I can start, Dawn, and then maybe you want to jump in afterwards. Right. So, I mean, again, we kind of talked a little bit about the importance of entrepreneurship, especially in the city of Detroit. Small businesses are the largest employer. There are over 50,000 small businesses in the city, right? And so they are the lifeblood of just kind of making sure our economy continues to move forward. The reason it was important for the foundation to partner with Black Leaders Detroit and Dwan kind of lifted some of that up earlier. But I think, in terms of how we were evaluating the partnership and what I think the posture that the foundation has had in partnership with Dwan and Black Leaders Detroit is that, trusting their and his expertise, right? They know the work, right? Better than we will know the work that they're doing. And so, we've talked about how it's really important to just resist the temptation to be paternalistic and just get out of the way and let them do the work. Understanding, making sure you're playing the role they want you to play, right? And so sometimes it's the block and tackle for folks. Sometimes it's to get out of the way. Sometimes it's thought partnership, but being really open to what they want that to look like. And, trust, candor, all of those things, Dwan mentioned this earlier, serving as a bridge, trying to connect and facilitate new relationships when possible. But also, having that conversation, the larger conversation around capital access, right? We're not going to fund our way out of this. And I mean, creating 10, 20, $100 million funds, right? The need is considerable. And so nearly 10 years ago, the Kellogg Foundation in 2015 released the report, The Business Case for Racial Equity, that led to the development of the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund, which is deployed in Detroit nearly $20 million to date and has spread across the country. But that's a particular conversation. We need to have a different conversation when it comes to institutional lending and capital access for Black and Brown entrepreneurs. Because again, there's the need, the appetite, and really need to kind of start questioning what do we mean when we use the word risk, right? Like we talked about that a little bit as well. And so, yeah, and trust and get out of the way. I think that's kind of how we approached this partnership.
Yeah, and what I'd add is Kumar mentioned the word posture, right? And oftentimes, I think when we're in this work, the way that we show up to the table, or I think the way that we're conditioned to when we haven't done the unlearning necessary, is we see the foundations or the check writers here, and we see the folks doing the work here. And oftentimes we come to the table like that, looking like that. But for us, it's important that our funding partners realize that they are funding partners, right? And as we realize the work requires money and funding partners, we understand the work does not get done without us. So we, show up to the table and we look for partners that understand that. And if they don't, we need to have that conversation before we start talking about, funding. And I think that, the people that we've dealt with at the Kellogg Foundation, especially Kumar, understand he does not show up to the table expecting there to be, some us to do any butt kissing or anything like that, because that's never on the table for us, right? Like we've walked away from funding where the partner just did not show up properly. And we've also, as we walked away from funding or told people that we would not accept it, we told them why, right? Like, if you're not coming and seeing us as a partner, and you want us to jump through hoops and you conduct yourself with that way, then we need to work on that first. But we've also had some of those partners come back with the proper posture, and we've welcomed their funding at that point. So I think that that's been huge. And when you see Kumar out in the community, he's well respected because he moves in a way that's respectful.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the ways that you're partnering, and also, Tuan, what are some of the challenges with, at least with other funders who you've experienced as you're trying to make sure that the partnerships are right for Black Leaders Detroit, and that they aren't just coming in the wrong way or extractive in the ways that are harmful to your organization. Are there any sort of tensions or sticking points that you've experienced? I think Kumar and Dwan, working together, that you've had to move through?
Trying to find more money to support Black Leaders Detroit. I mean, I think part of it is, work doesn't happen in silos, right? Nothing is separate, right? We were talking about entrepreneurship. Dwan kind of briefly mentioned this developer fund, the small developer fund that he's working on, so that leans into housing. And I think, we sometimes can think about our work kind of narrowly based on particular strategies or targets that we might have, but then understanding that, individuals don't live their lives in silos, and this work isn't done in silos either. And so trying to look at the whole picture, understanding that there are often kind of larger ecosystem plays that might be able to happen by just supporting one or two kind of pieces. And so I think, the challenge is that, and I think this is what we're kind of alluding to earlier, philanthropic resources are, they're considerable, but they're limited, right? In terms of what the true need is, right? And so I think the question is, how do we help change the conversation and amplify the voices of folks like Dewan, right? And others here locally to get to that place where we don't have to, they're not constantly fundraising every year, right? To do the work, right? And so I think that's part of it. As a partner, at a foundation, I think things to keep in mind: be willing to adjust. You need to be flexible, right? There's an old adage, every grant is doomed to be a success, right? And so I think having the relationship with Dwan and your grantee partner where you can really talk through what's working and what's not, right? Actually, the thing that we thought was the thing in October, in May is not. And so we need to be able to shift a little bit. And I think if you move in a transactional way, right, you aren't able to build that relationship and get to those places where you can truly try to understand each other's point of view, what you're solving for, right? Dwan and I talked about this before. It's like the difference between falling in love with the problem and falling in love with the solution, right? If you know what the solution is going to look like, if you have your eye on that already, you're probably going to miss it, right? Because you're already trying to like beeline to this particular thing. But if you really want to dig into the problem, it takes time, right? And it'll take a lot longer, but you got to bring people with you, right? Otherwise, you are likely going to rent change for a small period of time.
Yeah, I think, you know, for us, you know, Kumar said it early on, right? Wanting to move more dollars, right? But I think for, you know, I'm always curious, or I have been for some time, that I don't know what it's like for Kumar and our other partners once they come and they see what the work that we're doing and they're like, oh, I believe in this, let me make it happen. I'm always curious to what happens when they go take it back, right? Like, I don't know what that process looks like because, you know, and Kumar knows this, there are some folks that work in philanthropy right now that we get to connect with that really believe in the leaders that are out here doing the work. But, you know, I don't know how much of an uphill battle it is for them. And maybe not Kellogg because, yeah, I think some of the groundwork may have been done. But I always wonder what that looks like when you get back and you believe in something and you got to do some convincing. Some of our funders have smaller boards that are just old and older and used to doing things a certain way. And sometimes I hear from them like how challenging it might be just to move like, you know, a small dollar amount to get the relationship started sometimes. So what's it like for you, Kumar, on the inside? What's it like when you leave us and go back to
I mean, you know, I think no matter where you're at, right? I think folks want philanthropy to operate differently, right? There's a tremendous amount of need everywhere, right? And I often think about it a few different ways, right? One, change takes time, unfortunately, right? And philanthropy is often like a large institution. So it's like trying to ask a cruise ship to move like a speedboat. Doesn't always happen, right? And then I think while the work is deeply personal to a lot of folks, you can't take it personally, right? Because not everybody is having the same conversations that you're having, right? And so, you know, I think about our job as program officers is really serving as an internal advocate and trying to make folks understand as much as possible what the need is, who's doing the real work, and what we can do to support that. But I mean, it's a really privileged spot to be in, right? And so I'm grateful to try to, you know, serve as an advocate and partner.
I wish you were wrong about the change taking time, right? And it's true, but like, I feel like, man, sometimes we have less time than we do money, and people need the change right now. So I'm often tormented by like, let's implement the solutions that we see working and more of them now, but just you know, the bottleneck oftentimes being either the dollar amount or the people committed to actively like implementing the solution. So I wish you were not right, and I wish the change didn't take time.
Well, let me ask, because I know we're talking about this partnership. We're talking about, you know, Dwan, you had the question that Kumar started answering about what it looks like back at the foundation. But just what does it look like when you are taking both your point of view about, you know, what you want to happen, or the grant dollars that you're trying to move, you know, to organizations like Black Leaders Detroit. Like, how are you taking what you're learning about that work? How are you learning those things? And then how are you using that learning to make decisions? And this, I have this question for everybody, but I think right now, particularly for Kumar and Huilan.
Please, Milan.
Okay. Well, I'm just fascinated. Even though I read Black Detroit Leaders Detroit grantee report, and I also read the PO summary in our system, I'm still fascinated. And doing this work, we actually have learned a lot. And as we have a very desegregated, decentralized, sorry, but the wrong word, decentralized evaluation, the learning function. We actually have a very small, two of us working at the foundation level in evaluation and the learning. And we also decentralized the contracts with evaluators to the different program teams like Detroit, who is working with the program teams to generate learning. And one of the things that we have learned is that increasing small local businesses and business colors access to working capital is really an integrated strategy at the systems level. And among the over 100 current grantees who we are supporting to work on increasing working capital access, some of them are like Black Leaders Detroit, who's actually making the loans and the funds available to entrepreneurs. But others are also working on specific policy targets or general policy advocacy. And while others are actually, their work is more focusing on employer engagement and or building cross-sector partnerships. All of that is actually needed in order to tap into the dollars available and making more dollars available for businesses. Another thing that we have learned is actually a really hard lesson for us to learn is that for small businesses or businesses of color, supporting the startup is only the beginning. If you only have capital available to startups and not working on the stay-ups and the scale-ups, nothing, the wealth gap is still not going to be changed or narrowed or addressed even. So that whole continuum from startups to scale-ups is really what we need to focus on. And that's why at least in Detroit and New Orleans, we actually are paying attention to different players who are able to make the working capital available to entrepreneurs who just started their business, but also we want to identify their needs for staying up and keeping their businesses open and scaling or expansion. Another learning that we have done is actually we really are playing up the power of leveraging. We know that our funding is limited, even though it's bridging wealth gap and also supporting entrepreneurs of color is one of our focus areas. We still know that whatever money we have is very limited. So we are actually using our influence to bridge our grantees like Black Leaders Detroit to other funders and also to CDFIs, and so that they can actually partner and work together to make the ecosystem work for businesses in our local communities. The last lesson that I want to share is that, in a way, whatever our specific funding strategies or focus is, we have to stay true to our core values and to our paying attention to our North Star. Our North Star is children. All children thrive. But our core values is one of them is that we believe that community have the inherent capacity to effect change. And what Duan and Kumar had shared with you in the past 20, 30 minutes is that we know that we're not the experts. Duan type of grantee leaders and organizations, they know what the solutions are. So Kumar is right. We just need to stay out of the way after we make the connections, after we make the funds available. But that actually works miracles. And when I'm working on KPI, key performance indicators, quarterly and the fiscal year-end reports for 5.5 years. And I can see that when we stay true to our core values and paying attention to our North Star, like what Kumar and has been doing with Black Leaders Detroit type of grantees, miracles happen and the targets are met. Our programmatic targets are met and exceeded, and millions and millions, $93 million working capital was leveraged or raised in just 2.5 years. And that is real dollars. And you talk about show me the money, that's real dollars that are actually helping the real businesses and entrepreneurs and small businesses, local businesses, business color. How we learn it is actually, we are very lucky. We have our founder, Mr. Kellogg, in 1940, in the 1940s, I forgot the year, 43, I think. He wrote a formula for us. He said, it is through cooperative planning, intelligence study, and group action that long-lasting change is achieved. So those three things are really our guideposts for how we learn. We learn by listening to the communities and by funding or supporting feasibility studies or other analysis, landscape scans, and group actions like actions that Duan has been sharing with us in this webinar, that what they have been doing. So cooperative planning, intelligence study, and group action is how we learn.
Thanks, Huilan. That was very helpful to hear about all those different pieces and also the foundation's perspective on in particular, like the grantees that you're working with as experts and as the folks who are closest to community, and how that all ties back to Mr. Kellogg's original vision that he laid out. I wanted to ask, and then I wanted to ask one more question and then open it up for questions from folks who are on the webinar with us. How, and this is for also Kumar and Huilan, but Duan, always welcome your input and questions. I know in a call that we had another time, you were sharing a bit about how, like, what the different ways are that you see yourselves as partnering within Kellogg, or the ways that Huilan's work in L&I support program, and how, you know, the program work is it's kind of supporting each other, or what are the ways that you see that partnership playing out to strengthen the partnership that you have with Black Leaders Detroit?
Sure. So I could jump in, Huilan, if you'd like, and then kind of pass to you, Duan. So like I mentioned, I'm a place-based program officer based in Detroit. And so I think about our job is really to be informed, right? And work at the intersection of content and context, right? So whatever I'm hearing from partners like Duan, making sure that I'm sharing that internally. Often think about, I think one of the things that we had talked about is maybe just serving as a bridge to community, right? Living and working in place, making sure that information gets shared internally. WeLan is really kind of the bridge to so many different functions within the foundation, right? To leadership, but then also to like our knowledge and learning and data teams. And I think being able to bring folks like WeLan with us, right, deepens the work in a way that programmatic staff couldn't do alone, right? Because we hold different relationships and functions within our organization. One of the things that you talked about or you asked about, I think, Kat, was just around the facilitation of learning. Like, how do we kind of continue to do that? WeLan had mentioned absolutely that the real experts in the work are folks like Dwan, right? We talk about them having neighborhood PhDs, right? But then also, just making sure, again, as programmatic staff, that, we use our ears and mouth proportionately, right? And then being able to share that. WeLan, how would you kind of deepen any of that in terms of like roles that we play and how we kind of bridge the functions of program and learning?
Impact. Thank you, Kumar. Actually, without Kumar and the program teams and Dawn and the grantees, I won't have a job. Whatever I do is really more. So we have a structure. We have a very different organizational structure. We call it networked org organization structure. And that networked org actually allows functions like my function, learning impact to work across the board. And specifically, that kind of structure actually creates multiple learning opportunities on the organizational calendar. And I'll give you 3 examples. One is we have quarterly key performance indicators report working sessions that last 2 to 4 hours every quarter. And that working session actually is participated by the program teams like Detroit, and it's actually across the board. All our program teams have the working session. And they also work with evaluators who extract data by reviewing grantee reports. And the grantee reports has 4 questions. Those 4 questions actually have embedded the learning throughout. The first question is, what was done? The second one was what? The third set of question is what was not successful? Kumar and Dawn both said that the work is hard. There are a lot of missteps and challenges that are outside our control. Sometimes it's misjudgment. And what was not successful? And we want to know what was not successful so that we can actually ask the grantees to analyze and reflect what was learned. So the last question is, how do you recommend that the learning be applied to improve future strategies? So those 4 questions are actually used to guide grantee reports. And then by Kumar reviewing the grantee reports and guiding the revision, if necessary, of the grantee reports, that learning is already happening. And then through that grantee reporting, our evaluators are also able to aggregate. So it's not just one grantee, it's actually also not one grant portfolio. It's across the foundation. We have 8 program teams, units, and KPI reports. And we have the 8 set of working sessions. And then the last one is that after the KPI reports are done, our chief strategy and impact officer actually reviews everybody's report, and she would write a summary. And then that summary with the grantee reports, the KPI reports from the 8 teams are shared with and submitted to the board quarterly. And they spend at least, the board spend at least 1 hour every quarter to review and discuss. And that's how the learning is a system, is that from the grantee side, their work is visible through the KPI reports. But before it becomes a part of the KPI reports, every hand is on deck type of thing. And all the players, program officers, program managers, and leaders, program leaders, our executive leaders, and also learning and the impact team would be all, and our external evaluators are all becoming part of that sausage making.
Right. Thank you both for sharing. And so I wanted to close this part of our conversation by and turn to some questions that we have heard come in from some folks who are on the webinar. But wanted to thank you all for your candor and for sharing what you're working on and working towards and how that's going. You're all bringing some really rich examples and lessons. So thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Kayla.
Thanks, Kat. And thank you again to our panelists for all of your insights. One question, since we're on the topic of learning already, one question that came in is, how is evaluation and learning being leveraged to help close the racial wealth gap? So really, how is that being leveraged?
Kumar, you want to start or you want me to start?
Feel free, Whelan, I'll jump in after.
Yeah, I'll just talk about from the organizational higher level, the aggregated level, and maybe Kumar can talk about specifically how the learning and impact function or role is leveraged on the ground. So we actually we identified the needs surfaced by listening to the community to create targets. We call them programmatic targets. We actually create a 5-year roadmap with aggregated 5-year targets, and then we back map onto each year to become annual targets. And the wealth gap was identified as a need, and then it became one target. The target is specifically about raising or leveraging working capital to support local small businesses, women-owned businesses, and business POC-owned businesses. So then the leveraging of learning and the education evaluation is actually through the target setting based on what we identify as needs from grantee report the past. And so the whole cycle is specifically about, during the annual planning and the budgeting process, we identify the program teams and us as interdependencies that link us together in the system. And then learning is actually a common thread that connects the learning and impact with the program teams throughout the grant making cycle. And that's how the learning and the evaluation is leveraged from the proposal. And the proposal stage, it includes expected results. And Kumar and Dawn had already experienced it probably. That expected results are co-created between the grantee and the program team. And we provide the guidelines on how to write expected results. And we use the expected results to actually as part of the tracking for the KPI data.
Thanks, Milan. I think the question was around how evaluation and learning are kind of being leveraged to help close the racial wealth gap. I think one is just for case making, right? Having that information, one, helps create additional, hopefully, access to more resources internally, right? But then also being able to bring other funder colleagues with us, and then potentially the development of knowledge products, right? We're able to put it out to the field, which then allow, more folks to have access to that information. Like I mentioned before, in 2015 and 18, Foundation put out the business case for racial equity, and it lifted up the economy in 30 years could be $8 trillion larger if some of these racial disparities were eliminated, right? And so I think it seems intuitive and obvious, right? But sometimes, unfortunately, right, folks want to look at data and information to be able to step into the space.
I'd like to jump in and take a stab at sharing some thoughts on that as well. So one of the things that we don't get to measure, I wish I could figure out how to, is hope, right? And if you talk about like a monetary wealth gap, I think if you measured the hope that a Black person born and raised in the U.S. would have with all of the history that we have, you'd probably see a larger gap, right, as compared to some of the white people's hope that you have with the chasing the American dream, if you will. But I think as we see partnerships like this happen and more programs and organizations like Black Leaders Detroit being funded, I think there's a hope that's happening in people that are entrepreneurs, in people that will give themselves, need the extra push to actually give it a try, right? You have people walking around with these amazing ideas that they just don't believe will get funded. So if they see that there's a possibility for it, then I think that we're more likely to see more people showing up. There's one story that kind of comes to mind. I'll try to tell it really quickly. As Kumar mentioned, businesses being labeled high risk. One of the businesses that that received a no interest loan from us, we were aware of some of the challenges that this business had. This business actually got a loan from us, went out of business 5 months later. Called me 2 weeks before he went out of business and said, "Dewan, I'm closing my shop. I'm going to continue catering as a restaurant. You don't have to worry about anything. I wanted you to hear it from me and not anybody else. As I close, you can continue to make your the ACH withdrawals from the same bank account. I will keep it open." Called us 2 months ago, did that for about 4 months, didn't miss a payment, called us 2 months ago and said, "I'm going to pay the loan off in full," right? Still had a decent sized balance. So for us, we were so happy to take that risk. And that's not going to be the case for everybody. We get that. But we realize that like the work that we're doing is important and it's necessary. And some of the labels that have been received aren't warranted at all.
I agree. I want to add one last thing. I know we are almost at time. Is the leveraging learning and the evaluation function is actually also manifested in the narrative change. Is that we gather, generate, partnering with our communications and grantees, of course, and evaluators, information, data, and stories to create knowledge products. And knowledge products are disseminated to change narratives about, say, Black businesses, or they're being high risk, they will never pay back the loans type of prejudices and biases that are seemingly very systemically embedded in our grant-making practice. So I think the narrative change is very important. I wouldn't want to claim credit for that only, but we do play a key role in the narrative change about wealth building and also bridging or closing wealth gap.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today, but I will be passing it to Kat to wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you. And I just love some of your thoughts and what you're offering on this question, and Dwan about talking about hope and sharing that story to really, bring to life what this work is just really appreciate you all for sharing around that question. So I know we just have a couple minutes left. I'm just going to share very quickly that since this is a webinar series, we have our next webinar set. The time is tentatively set for June 18th. It's with the Cerdna Foundation and 1863 Ventures. Hopefully you can all join us. I know Kayla is going to drop a registration link in the chat. And so that's mostly what we have by way of closing, but I wanted to close with asking Huilan, Kumar, Dwan, if there are any other closing thoughts that you wanted to share before we wrap up our time today.
I just want to thank everybody who joined the webinar, thanking Kumar and thank Duan and thank Kat and Kayla from CEI to actually have the webinar. I think for philanthropy, I do want to remind us that traditional grant making is only one tool in our toolbox. We also have PRIs and the mission impact investing or mission-driven investment or mission-related investments as other tools, effective tools of raising capital to support entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Huilan. Kumar?
I just saw the other question that someone had asked around values-based conversation around the word risk. We had done an internal audit to look at who was getting funding, right? Like who led the organization, who was on their board, who were their staff. And sometimes we had really tough conversations around like, why are there disparities in terms of who has access to funding? And I think that's why representative leadership is so important in so many ways, and also understand who are the real experts in this work. But yeah, that's just a quick pass at that conversation I saw in the Q&A queue. Appreciate everyone taking the time to join the conversation today.
Yeah, and I would just thank everybody for joining us and hearing the thoughts of some passionate folks that's trying to make the world a little bit better place. The world can be stubborn, but we are committed. If you want to learn anything else about Black Leaders Detroit, you can find us at blackleadersdetroit.org. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. And hopefully see you next time. Take care.